from Japan to the U.S., and it was just a matter of time until the two bombs ended the war. So another turning point. And today, we're looking at a very, probably second only to the crucifixion and resurrection of Christ, a major turning point, and that is the conversion of a Christ hater to a Christ lover and a proclaimer of the gospel, and that is the Apostle Paul. And I wanted to go over just this a little bit. Let's go to Acts chapter 9, and we'll read we've got actually three accounts I'm going to read. We've got three accounts in the book of Acts that all recount this event, and I'm going to kind of look at them all. We start with Acts chapter 9, and we start with verse 1. And Saul, yet breathing out threatenings and slaughter against the disciples of the Lord, went unto the high priest and desired of him letters to Damascus to the synagogue, that if he found any of this way, that is, followers of Christ, whether they were men or women, he might bring them bound unto Jerusalem. And as he journeyed, he came near Damascus, and suddenly there shined round about him a light from heaven. And he fell to the earth, and heard a voice saying unto him, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? And he said, Who art thou, Lord? And the Lord said, I am Jesus, whom thou persecutest. It is hard for thee to kick against the pricks. And he, trembling and astonished, said, Lord, what wilt thou have me to do? And the Lord said, Arise, go into the city, and it shall be told thee what thou must do. And the men which journeyed with him stood speechless, hearing a voice, but seeing no man. And Saul arose from the earth, and when his eyes were opened, he saw no man, but they led him by the hand, and brought him into Damascus. And he was there, and he was 3 days without sight, neither did eat nor drink. And there was a certain disciple at Damascus named Ananias. And to him the Lord said in a vision, Ananias. And he said, Behold, I am here, Lord. The Lord said unto him, Arise and go into the street which is called Straight, and inquire in the house of Judas for one called Saul of Tarsus, for behold, he prayeth, and hath seen in a vision a man named Ananias coming in, and putting his hand on him, that he might receive his sight. Then Ananias answered, Lord, I have heard many things of this man, how much evil he hath done to thy saints at Jerusalem. And here he hath authority from the chief priest to bind all that call on thy name. And the Lord said unto him, Go thy way, for he is a chosen vessel unto me, to bear my name before the Gentiles and kings and the children of Israel. And I will show him how great things he must suffer for my name's sake. And Ananias went his way, entered into the house, and putting his hands on him, said, Brother Saul, the Lord, even Jesus, that appeared unto thee in the way, as thou camest, hath sent me, that thou mightest receive thy sight, and be filled with the Holy Ghost. And immediately there fell from his eyes as it had been scales, and he received sight forthwith, and arose and was baptized. And when he had received meat, he was strengthened. Then was Paul certain days with the disciples which were at Damascus. If we go ahead, then we have two accounts that Paul relates as he's before the kings, Agrippa and Festus. Let's go to Acts 22, 1-16. We have his account again of the event. And so here he is again defending himself before the multitude, and he says, Men, brethren, fathers, hear ye my defense, which I make now unto you. And when they had heard that he spake in the Hebrew tongue to them, they kept the more silence. And he saith, I am verily a man which am a Jew, born in Tarsus, a city of Cilicia, yet brought up in this city at the feet of Gamaliel, and taught according to the perfect manner of the law of the fathers, and was zealous toward God, as ye all are this day. And I persecuted this way unto the death, binding and delivering into prison both men and women. And also the high priest doth bear me witness, and all the estate of the elders, from whom I also received letters unto the brethren, and went to Damascus to bring them which were there bound unto Jerusalem for to be punished. And it came to pass that, as I made my journey and was come nigh unto Damascus about noon, suddenly there shone from heaven a great light round about me, and I fell to the ground, and heard a voice saying unto me, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? And I answered, Who art thou, Lord? And he said unto me, I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom thou persecutest. And they that were with me saw indeed the light, and were afraid, but they heard not the voice of him that spake to me. And I said, What shall I do, Lord? And the Lord said unto me, Arise, go into Damascus, and there it shall be appointed of thee all things, or there it shall be told thee of all things which are appointed for thee to do. And when I could not see for the glory of the light, being led by the hand of them that were with me, I came into Damascus, and one Ananias, a devout man according to the law, having a good report of all the Jews which dwelt there, came unto me and stood and said unto me, Brother Paul, receive thy sight. And the same hour I looked upon him, and he said, The God of our fathers hath chosen thee, that thou shouldst know his will, and see that just one, and shouldst hear the voice of his mouth. For thou shalt be his witness unto all men of what thou hast seen and heard. And now why tarriest thou? Arise and be baptized, and wash away thy sins, calling on the name of the Lord. And if we go to 26, 9 to 18, we have Paul again repeats this account. Let's see where I'm at here. Let's see where we're at. 26, 9 to 18. Here we go. And here Paul is making his defense before King Agrippa, and he relates the story a third time or a second time. Actually, well, I'll start with 9, but I'm going to start back with verse 1, I guess, to put everything in context. Then Agrippa said unto Paul, Thou art permitted to speak for thyself. Then Paul stretched forth the hand and answered for himself, I think myself happy, King Agrippa, because I shall answer for myself this day before thee touching all the things whereof I am accused of the Jews, especially because I know thee to be an expert in all customs and questions which are among the Jews. Wherefore I beseech thee to hear me patiently. My manner of life from my youth, which was at the first among mine own nation at Jerusalem, know all the Jews, which knew me from the beginning, if they would testify that after the most straightest sect of religion I lived a Pharisee. And now I stand and am judged for the hope of the promise made of God unto our fathers, unto which promise our 12 tribes, instantly serving God day and night, hope to come. For which hope's sake, King Agrippa, I am accused of the Jews. Why should it be thought a thing incredible with you that God should raise the dead? I have really thought with myself that I ought to do many things contrary to the name of Jesus of Nazareth, which thing I also did in Jerusalem. And many of the saints did I shut up in prison, having received authority from the chief priest. And when they were put to death, I gave my voice against them. And I punished them off in every synagogue, and compelled them to blaspheme, and being exceedingly mad against them, I persecuted them, even unto strange cities. Whereupon, as I went to Damascus with authority and commission from the chief priest, at midday, O king, I saw in the way a light from heaven, above the brightness of the sun, shining round about me, and them which journeyed with me. And when we were all fallen to the earth, I heard a voice speaking unto me, saying in the Hebrew tongue, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? It is hard for thee to kick against the pricks. And I said, Who art thou, Lord? He said, I am Jesus, whom thou persecutest. But rise and stand upon thy feet, for I have appeared unto thee for this purpose, to make thee a minister and a witness both of these things which thou hast seen, and of those things in the which I will appear unto thee, delivering thee from the people and from the Gentiles, unto whom now I send thee, to open their eyes and to turn them from darkness to light, and from the power of Satan unto God, that they may receive forgiveness of sin and inheritance among them which are sanctified by faith in me, or that is in me. So we have these 3 accounts of this incredible event that occurs with Paul. Paul probably, if you were to look at it from a human perspective, is the most unlikely convert you would have encountered at the time. He was a vicious persecutor of the church, of Christians. He was cruel and heartless. And we know by his own testimony, he went into houses, he took men and women to take them back. And no doubt, these men and women he would carry back to Jerusalem. He left their little ones behind without mom and dad. He was a very evil man. Now, as we look at this story, I want to kind of look at some things that were influential in Paul's life, both places and people. Now, if we look here, I got this little map up here. It kind of shows you the relative positions of the different cities we're going to look at here. As you see, Tarsus is up here, south central Turkey, Asia Minor, got Damascus, and Jerusalem. I want to look at these cities a little bit. What do we know about these cities and the influence they would have had on Saul? Oops. Let's see. Let's try Jerusalem first. Saul was born in Tarsus, but it appears that for much of his life He was raised in Jerusalem and came under the influence of Jerusalem. We know that Jerusalem is a... what's going on here? Jerusalem is built on Mount Moriah, Mount Zion. Mount of Olives is just across the way from it. And the city is actually built on a great promontory where it really can only be accessed by an invading army from the north. The other sides are protected by extremely steep valleys. And sets about 2,500 feet above sea level, just to get some idea. When I was in Haiti, I went back to visit Anna's birth family and Tim's before we brought them out. And we were up at the missionaries, Terry and Connie, where they lived. They were about 2,500 feet above sea level, up in the mountain. It was a rather arduous climb to get up there. So getting up to the city would have required a certain amount of physical exertion. Jerusalem is basically removed from any of the trade routes. It's only reachable from the north side. The east, south, west have steep valleys, and it has Judean mountains to the west. And then in a short space of about 10 miles, it drops 4,000 feet down to the Dead Sea. Something's wrong here. Huh? That might be me. I zoomed it in to make it a little bigger. I got... Well, there we go, right there. That's good. That'll do it. Thank you. So, now we know Jerusalem was formerly a Canaanite city, and it was conquered by David in 1000 BC. And David made it the capital of Jerusalem, and it is the capital of Jerusalem again to this day. Thanks to Donald Trump and his recognition of the established fact. It's an established fact that this is David's city, the city of David, the capital of Jerusalem. Solomon built his temple in Jerusalem, and he expanded the city and made it a very glorious, beautiful city with the works he did. Alexander the Great gained control of Jerusalem in 332 BC, which really begins the Hellenization of the area, the Hellenization of a lot of the Jews, the spreading of the Greek language, which would be important in spreading the gospel, because people that were influenced by Alexander's conquest, they became Greek-speaking people, so that from one end of the empire to the other, people could communicate with each other, whether they're Jews or Persians or wherever Alexander had control. The Greek language made inroads so that people could converse. We know the temple was restructured and the city was expanded by Herod in 37 BC. And then obviously, of course, Jesus Christ was crucified in Jerusalem in 33 AD, and Rome eventually destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD. This is the city where Paul was, we think he was raised. I don't know what portion of his life, at what age he moved to Jerusalem, but he did spend a significant portion of his life there. So let me move on to Tarsus. Like I said, Tarsus is right here. I don't know if you recall from history, but most of the cities that surround the eastern fringe of the Mediterranean, they were Greek cities. They were colonized and established by Greeks. So that Ephesus, Colossae, Tarsus, Antioch, these are, and all of these cities that you're going to see Paul writing his letters to, they're Greek. They're Greek cities. They were established by Greek people, even though they may have been for periods of time under control of the Persians and other governments. Even at this day, they're under the control of the Romans, but they're still essentially Greek cities. So let's look at Tarsus. Tarsus was Paul's birthplace. Like I said, it's located in South Central Asia Minor, which today is Turkey. It was the capital of the Roman province of Cilicia, and this is a little tidbit of information I didn't realize until I studied this. It was the first meeting place between Mark Antony and Cleopatra when they were trying to wrest control of the Roman government from, I think it was Augustus. Tarsus was a pretty big city at its time. Population estimated to be anywhere between 100,000 to 150,000 people. That's a lot of people for an ancient city. So it's a very large metropolis. It was also, it became a Roman subject city after Pompey crushed the Sicilian pirates in 67 BC. It came under Roman control. And this is important because we know that Jews began to be granted Roman citizenship under Pompey. Paul's father was a Roman citizen. And because Paul's father was granted Roman citizenship, Paul became a citizen at birth of the Roman Empire, which would be used of the Lord in order to get Paul to Rome to preach the gospel in Rome. It's located on the Cydnus River, about 12 miles up from its mouth, and it was also an important intellectual center. There were three main universities in the ancient world at the time, one in Alexandria, one in Athens, and one at Tarsus. So there's a great intellectual influence here as well, and we see from Paul, as he goes and preaches the gospel, and he argues with people, and he reasons with them. Paul is a highly intellectual, academically trained man. You can tell that he has been influenced by the intellectual people of the time. Tarsus was a grand city. It had everything that a Roman city would have at the time: gymnasiums, fountains, stadiums, all these kind of things that would mark it with Roman influence. One of the things Tarsus was known for was the production of fabric made out of the fur, the long black fur of local goats. And they were able to use this to make striped tents. They could do, black, white. And we know from Paul's own account that he himself was a tent maker. And I'm sure he learned this trade in Tarsus. So the fabric from these goats was used to make both tents and sails for ships, so it becomes commercially important. And then now we're moving on to Damascus. This is where Paul is headed, or Saul is headed, in order to continue his war against the church, his war against God himself. He's warring against God. So Damascus is regarded as one of the oldest continuously occupied cities in the world. According to Josephus, he claims that Damascus was founded by Uz, the grandson of Shem, or would be the great-grandson of Noah. So it's been around since not very long after the flood, and the world begins to be repopulated by the descendants of Noah. It's located in 70 miles from the coast. It is a very fertile oasis kind of a place, kind of set right in the middle. It's got mountains on the west, and then it opens up to a desert on the east. But it's about a 50-mile radius area that's on a plateau that is well watered by a lot of rivers. So it's known as a very fertile oasis. It has lots of meadows, orchards, gardens, regarded at the time as being one of the most beautiful cities in the ancient world. It was a major caravan center, situated at the junction of three major trade routes. We have our first biblical mention of Damascus in Genesis 14:15, when Abraham goes to war against Chedorlaomer and the city of Damascus is mentioned. We also know that one of Abraham's servants, Gehazi, I can't think of the name right now, it escapes me, but she was from Damascus. So Damascus has been around almost since the dawn of time. Damascus is located about 130 miles northeast of Jerusalem. It took a caravan anywhere from 6 to 7 days to make the trip. So when Paul is making his trip from Jerusalem to Damascus, he's got a lot of time to think about what he's going to be doing. He's got 6 days, and if you take the passages in context, as he's nearing Damascus is when he is encountered by the Lord. So it was known to have many Jewish inhabitants by the time of Christ. Also many early Christian converts. Obviously, Paul knew of this, and he was going to go there and wage war against these Christian converts. And then this interesting little fact, on the eve of the Roman War in 66 AD, which would eventually lead to the destruction of Jerusalem, the Gentile inhabitants of Damascus rose up and murdered the Jewish inhabitants. Now, I want to look at some of the individuals, men who influenced Paul, or who are influential in giving to us the story of Paul. This, again, is the book of Acts, is the history of the expansion of the church under the guidance of the Holy Spirit. And Luke, even though Luke is not specifically mentioned in either Acts or the Gospel of Luke as being their authors, every credible Bible scholar and commentary I look at, they all ascribe both of these works, Luke and Acts, to Luke. They all agree that he is more than likely the author. So he authored both Acts and Luke, and they are really considered to be a single work rather than two, but they have been divided up. So they got the Gospel with the Gospels and the Acts following John. We know from Colossians 4:14 that Luke was a trained physician. He has an eye for detail, and he is using various accounts and testimonies to compile his narrative. I like Luke because Luke kind of reminds me of an investigator. He's out there trying to get the information. He wants to be accurate. He wants it to be right. He puts it in a logical order. And so he is basing much of his writing on eyewitness testimony, though not always necessarily his own. But he was, and we'll see from various passages, that he was a companion of Paul. A lot of the things he's writing about, he did experience himself, but many of the things he's writing about are accounts that he heard from Peter and the other apostles and the disciples. He chronicled and categorized all of these things and wrote them down in his account. So he's desiring to write his account in a logical order, the events of Jesus and the growth of his church. They say that Luke is using a style of Greek which was used by highly educated men. So he's a very educated man, and he uses that to compile this account. Also, it is believed that Luke was a Gentile, and his accounts seem to be, they are written, Theophilus is a Gentile. He's writing his accounts for Gentile consumption, for a Gentile to read and understand what Jesus was about in his church. And of course, like I said, his accounts are the result of a thorough investigation, and he is writing objective truth. He wants to write absolute truth and not it was pretty common back in those days when one is writing an account of themselves and their lives. They puff up the good things and they ignore the bad things. But he wanted to be true to the account of things. So in the Gospel of Luke, we see Luke is writing about the life of Christ. In Acts, his main thrust is relating the growth of the church. And at the time that Paul meets Christ on the way to Damascus, we're still only a couple of years away from the crucifixion. And at this time, the church is growing by leaps and bounds. It's growing in Jerusalem. It has spread to Samaria. As a result of Paul's initiation of persecution, the believers are spreading out, and the church is just growing all over the region, Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria. So much of Acts may be from his own first-hand knowledge. We know that he was a companion of Paul. We see reference to this in Philemon 24. His historical account is comprehensive. It spans a period of about 60 years. He begins with the birth of John the Baptist and goes all the way to when Paul is in Rome, a period of about 60 years. And Paul says that Luke was the one who was faithful to him to the end in 2 Timothy 4:11. That was the second or first? That was the first. All right. Well, I'll hit Theophilus real fast. Theophilus is specifically named as the recipient of these two treatises by Luke, the Gospel. In Acts, other than being identified by name, we really know nothing about him. His name means loved of God. Seems to have been a person of high rank because Luke refers to him as most excellent Theophilus. It's a title that would have been used for somebody who was in a high position, either politically, maybe even socially, but he is somebody who is highly esteemed. We don't know anything about Theophilus. The conjecture ranges from that he may have been a recent convert, wanting more information about the Christian faith, or he may have been one investigating the claims of Christianity before he makes his own decision to follow Christ. There's really no clear consensus on that. There is an extra-biblical account that identifies a very wealthy city leader in Antioch by the name of Theophilus. And we know that Paul went to Antioch as a place that Paul had visited. So It's possible this is the same guy. We don't know for sure. And some of the commentators I've read suggested that if this guy is as wealthy as he is, or as he may have been one who helped to underwrite the expenses of some of Paul's missionary journeys. Don't know for sure, it's just speculation. So we will pick up with Paul himself, or Saul, next week. Kind of his background, and then some of the lessons we can take from this incredible intervention on the part of an avowed enemy of Christ. So, are there any questions or comments? Yes, Mike. I think that is reconciled. I saw a couple of commentaries reconcile this by saying, in the one, they heard the voice, they heard the noise of a voice. But in the other, they didn't hear the voice and they didn't understand what was being said.
That had to do with the Greek word meaning voice.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct? I read that in the commentary somewhere because they were talking about, discrepancies or contradictions in the Bible. And I didn't know if you know Greek, understand?
I don't know Greek. No.
I heard that it has something to do with that, the Greek language and how it's
I will look into this.
now, and that it was saying basically the same thing you're saying, but it had something to do with one of the Greek words.
I'll have to look into it. Yeah, because what I came across, what I saw explained was, the one means they heard the voice as if they heard a noise, but they couldn't understand what was being said. Only Saul was being specifically talked to. They heard the noise, but they didn't hear what was being said to Paul because they didn't understand. It was just noise to them.
It'll be like us hearing somebody speaking a different language.
Yeah, and I think there is another passage where the Lord speaks out of heaven, and the others around don't really understand what's being said, except for those who are being addressed. I'll have to look that passage up, but that was referred to also in the commentaries, I think in the Gospels, where Christ speaks from heaven, or God speaks from heaven. But I will definitely look into that for next week. Try to get the best explanation I can find for it. So, if there's nothing else, then I thank you, gentlemen, for your time.